Okay, good evening, viewers, and welcome to LTV this evening for a program titled A Story That Should Be Told. And this evening, our story that should be told relates to the life's work of O.L.A native Sister Eileen Healy O.L.A. I will begin by introducing the beginning of the story. It goes back a long time to 2000 years ago, essentially. And it begins with an itinerant preacher known locally as Jesus, son of Joseph the carpenter, read from a scroll in the synagogue one day and announced the arrival of a new way of life, a radical departure from the old, revengeful, ancient code of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. This new way involved loving God and neighbour, forgiving our enemies, praying for our enemies, doing good to those who hate you, praying for those who persecute you. It involved having characteristics such as humility. It involved good news for the poor, curing the sick, helping the blind to see, and the lame to walk. This was the new way. In due course, this new way of life became known as Christianity. It is now the largest religion in the world. It is the fastest growing religion in the world and also the most persecuted. Since then, hundreds and thousands of priests and nuns, religious brothers and lay missionaries have dedicated their entire adult lives to living out this new way. There are many wonderful stories to be told of their goodness, of their service to others, of their selfless giving. And one of those stories, as I already said, relates to our special guest this evening. She is a nun, she is a qualified nurse, a qualified doctor, a qualified psychiatrist, a qualified surgeon. Sister Eileen Healy, it is my pleasure to welcome you and to ask us to tell us some of your story, a story that should be told. So to begin with, I would ask you to start not at the beginning, as usual, but in the middle, in Africa, where you spend much of your time. Perhaps you would begin so and tell us about your time in Africa, please.
Well, it's a big question. My life in Africa began in 1968. I had just qualified the previous year as a doctor, had done 6 months in Bantry and 6 months in London. I was full of head knowledge, but a lot of the practical stuff that I was to meet, I had to learn on the spot. I went to Africa in the middle of the Biafran War, which was part of Nigeria, seceded, and there was a big battle, big war, which lasted about, I suppose, 2 or 3 years. And so I went out in the middle of that.
Yes. So essentially, you were thrown in at the deep end, or in terms of military, you were practically at the front line, and you, as already said, while you had much book learning, you didn't have the experience, but you got it pretty quickly, and you had to adapt. Now, I'm told that among the feats you performed was the amputation of a man's leg underneath a tree. Um, would you like to tell us a bit about that and some other of the unusual things that you had to do at that time of war in Nigeria and Biafra?
Well, the hospitals that I worked in, they were all, I was the only doctor. There was no anaesthetist. There would be 2 or 3 more of our own sisters, our own Irish sisters, and perhaps a few more African sisters. So everything that came in the gate, we had to deal with. Everything, because the nearest hospital would be perhaps 300 miles away. during a war, we had a massive cholera epidemic, a massive typhoid epidemic. We had injuries that I had never seen in my life before, gunshot wounds, women who were trying to deliver out in the bush with ruptured uteruses. Their wombs had burst open because they would come in the middle of the night with maybe the baby dead. You had to operate straight away. We had no theatre, no lab at the time, so I was O positive blood. I often went down, put out my hand, gave a pint of blood, and it was cross-matched on a little slide, and usually if it matched, then I did the surgery afterwards. The man with the amputation, it wasn't actually done under a tree. It was done very near a tree. A man who had shattered, his whole below his knee was shattered. So like that, I had to first of all give the pint of blood. We had no anaesthetist at the time. I gave a spinal anaesthetic, which we always did, give an injection into the spine and paralysed him from below, and try to remember from my textbooks what I should be doing. I went slowly. The nurses, the Irish nurses who were there, the sisters, they had years of experience before me, so they were between us. We guided each other, and I prayed my way through many, many surgeries like that. The man survived.
Very good.
And exactly around the same time as that, they had a habit of, if they were celebrating something, they would have gunshot all along the path and little threads going through it, and they would light this, and the gunshot went all over the place. So this day, this boy came in and he had gunshot in his abdomen. And his dad said he had 5 gunshot pellets. So we found on the surface, we found 6 of them. But the dad said there's another one. So we later that night, his blood pressure dropped, so we knew that something was happening inside. So in the middle of the night, we had no light. We had a flash lamp like this, a storm lamp. Went over to the theatre. We had a little girl who put the mask on his face. We knew that he was bleeding inside. We dressed, scrubbed up. I opened him, and the first thing we saw was worms. The thing had made a hole in his bowel, and he had worms inside. So the worms all. The little girl who was giving him the anaesthetic ran when she saw the worms, and it was just so comical. Later, everything we fixed everything. We removed the worms, closed his bowel, but these incidences happened all the time. Amazing things happen. Amazing results with very limited. So I think we were very much depending on God. And so often I used to think of my mother at home in the kitchen praying. And that was a picture I had in my mind so often. And it kept me going.
Mm-hmm. Extraordinary. Just in relation to the worms, did he suffer from worms previous to the wound? Yes?
Every respectable Nigerian has worms.
Really?
So they used to say. Everybody has worms because they're endemic, and you don't take much notice of them.
And are they in the water systems?
Yeah.
Possibly, yeah. You mentioned about your mother praying at home. Was your mother alive at that time?
She was.
Yes.
She was.
And I think many missionaries and people maybe away, that would be important to them. To know that people are actually praying for them at home. So would you like to comment on that, and also on the fact that you just said yourself that in both the operations you mentioned, you said, you prayed through them. How important is that, and how real is the help that you get from praying?
For me, I don't think I would have survived without my prayer life. At home, we had very strong faith at home, but we other things were so important as well, work and honesty and all the other things. I think I took that with me to Nigeria, that my faith was so important, but also my work. We put everything, we put all we had into every aspect of life, whether it was doing surgery, being with people, praying. I think they were all so important. When we were working, it was kind of a prayer. We prayed our way, whether we were using words to pray, but when you have so little, you're totally dependent on something that's bigger than yourself, something that's greater than yourself. And as missionaries, we used our actions more than our words. We were the message. We tried to live the message. We tried to be loving and compassionate and non-judgmental. And I always said that it's very hard. It's much easier for people to believe that God is loving and compassionate and forgiving if I am loving and compassionate and forgiving. And they can believe in a God who is just and dependable. If we get them a well with clean water and medicines, then God is no longer far away. God is just there beside them, and almost can touch. And I think our message came across in that way, rather than trying to
Yes.
use words.
I think we mentioned earlier, and you told me which saint said it. I mentioned to you about a saint who had given advice that go preach the gospel and use words if you have to.
If necessary, and if necessary, use words.
Will you tell us who said that?
Saint Francis of Assisi.
Yes.
Yeah, to his own monks, he used to say, "Preach the gospel, and if necessary, use words."
Yes.
So words are limited, whereas actions speak. We always say actions speak louder than words. And if you help somebody, and if we all know what it's like to receive, we feel good. We feel good, and we make people feel. A lot of these people are very poor. They're at the end of very unjust systems, and here we come. We try and help them. They begin to realise that they're precious. They're important. How many times in the middle of the night the nurse will come to the window, "Please, sister, the woman is whatever, come in with whatever is wrong." So you get up in the middle of the night, you walk across, and you do whatever is necessary. So in these very practical ways, I don't tell people you are precious. I do it.
Yes.
And hopefully they'll get the message.
They pick it up, yes. Just in relation to prayer again, as in my own life, and indeed many people of my generation, we depended on God a lot. I think you said maybe we had to, we needed to. But I think we live in a time as well, and we have to acknowledge this, that many people now say, "I don't believe in God, I don't believe in that." But clearly, you are an educated lady, you are a qualified doctor, psychiatrist and surgeon, and you would not agree that there isn't a God. Or would you?
God is so much part of my life. I wouldn't be here if there wasn't a God.
Yes.
That God is within me. God is the one who works through me. My humanity is used by God, used by Christ. This is Christ in the world today. The same spirit that was in Jesus is in me. And my humanity and your humanity and everybody's humanity is the vehicle through which Christ reaches people today. And if I don't do it, that bit of his work will not be done. If I don't do it.
Okay. So clearly, praying was important to you. Clearly, you believed help was available by asking for it, and clearly, you believed that you got that help many times in the various situations that you outlined for us. Many people today also claim, or at least suggest, that people who go to work in the missions would be better off to stay at home, and that the only thing they are doing when they go is changing the culture of the people there. I myself disagree with that. I'm sure you would too, but would you like to comment on it?
I suppose you hear these things now, but when when I went in the in my younger days, full of enthusiasm, full of it's a huge challenge, and I went. I wasn't even thinking of changing culture. I was thinking of helping people who were less well off than myself. I was these ideas I hear now,
Yes.
and maybe some of it is true, but these were people who were in dire need of help, and if somehow I suppose I got the call to those two sisters that I met who were very ill. They were.
Can I just ask you about the two sisters now that you mention it? I think at the earlier part of your life, you worked as a psychiatric nurse in Our Lady's Hospital in Cork.
That's right. That's right.
And there you came in contact with two patients who were O.L.A. sisters.
That's right.
And who needed help. So you might take
Yeah.
up that point first, please.
Where I come from in Cooley, we had no secondary school or Bellaburna, so I went to the Tech after I finished primary school, and then I joined my older sister as a nurse in Our Lady's Hospital. And it was there that I met the first two nuns I ever met. There were two O.L.A. sisters. One was a chronic schizophrenic, and the other was a manic depressive. And it was because of those two very sick women that I became a missionary. Not because of anything they ever said to me, because they were too ill to communicate very much. So, but it often gives me comfort now to think that illness and old age, disability, mental illness, there are no barriers to God's ability to use us. So it was those two sisters really that somehow it was through them that I became a sister myself.
That's extraordinary in the sense that their illness, the one outcome of it was you becoming a surgeon and working in war-torn borders of Biafra, I'm assuming. Now, can I also ask you what other work the O.L.A. sisters were involved in Nigeria? They were clearly involved in the provision of medicine, caring for the sick, the hospitals, etc.
Training was a big training in education. We were founded for the African women.
Oh.
The SMA priests went to Africa, realized that they couldn't get anywhere without women, which was a lovely thing to happen. So we were founded by one of them, and we were founded particularly for the uplifting of the African woman and child. So we were very involved in education, training teachers, all aspects of education and hygiene, and in training nurses, and helping the sick. But it was everything we did was we were trying to make ourselves redundant in the sense that we trained others to take our place. We have many Nigerian O.L.As now who run all our hospitals and schools. So we, did ourselves out of a job.
I want now to link all that you have said with my introduction. The introduction of the itinerant preacher, Jesus, who was known locally as the son of Joseph the carpenter, who announced, sometimes called the kingdom of God. It's not, I think, the best term. I think a new way of living is, I think, a better way. And would you see the link between that new way and what you and the other O.L.A. sisters and many others, of course, are doing?
In my own mind, I mean, Jesus was what Jesus' main message, what you said, he taught us how to be good human beings, I think. To be loving, to be compassionate, to be non-judgmental, to treat everybody equally, in other words, to love. God is love. And I think what sisters do, what anybody of faith does, is really to take that message seriously, to take it really seriously. And often at the beginning of a day, in Nigeria and even here, I often say, what do I want to say today? And I say it with my actions. What gospel message? You know, the stories that Jesus told were all about the prodigal son, forgiving people who had done you wrong, all these things. So I think we are trying to live that message in the best way we can, with all the facilities that we have, and we go to the poorest of the poor. And I think in Africa, places we are in, were poor, but I think also people with mental health problems are really the poorest of the poor as well, because people are afraid of mental illness. You often see collections for cancer, for MS, for asthma. You rarely ever see collections for, mental health.
Correct. Correct indeed. Now, you also initiated a scheme for providing medicines for the area in which you work. Now, clearly, medicines were very scarce there, but you came up with a very simple scheme, and I think an effective one for providing medicines there. Would you care to elaborate on that for us?
Luckily, I had lots of contacts in Ireland from my own training, and that doctors working in different nurses. So I began to contact these people while I was away. I used to come home every 2 or 3 years, and people would collect medicines that were still good, but maybe reaching their expiry date maybe in the next 6 months. There was one lady in Galway who used to collect all the syringes, the disposable syringes, wash them. We used to carry out huge big boxes of them. Medicines that we just couldn't afford in Africa. So our catheters, drips, all kinds of things, we found ways of getting them to Nigeria, and they were a godsend to us. They were a godsend. And people who helped us, they were so much part of our mission. I mean, so many of the people that helped us, they would never see Africa. But somehow they touched the Christ, and they touched the suffering Christ in ways that they never knew. I knew, but they would never know how they, brought new life to situations that would have died.
And in relation to the syringes, lest anybody misunderstand, while you had the syringes and they were sterilized, etc., you used new needles when you reached there. It was a good scheme, and
they would be thrown out otherwise up in Galway. They would be disposed of.
Yes. You mentioned, and if you don't mind me referring to it, you mentioned the suffering Christ. In the time in which we live at this day, this is 25th of May 2015, and we live in a time when Christians are being beheaded. And we have had an example in Libya where 21 Christians were beheaded because they were Christians. There were other beheadings in areas of Iraq. people have been crucified, tied to crosses, and until they died. Um, Also, Christians in particular, are being isolated and shot, as happened, I think, in Kenya. Certainly, Christians are suffering in Sudan and many, many other countries. So, to that extent, would you agree that the suffering Christ is a reality today?
And that's the suffering Christ that we all need to respond to. You know, we I mean, it breaks your heart when you hear these horrible, horrible stories. But you know, the world is now small, and we hear stories. I mean, there was lots of bad things happened, I'm sure, all down the centuries,
Sure.
but we didn't hear. You know,
Yes.
if there was a murder in Dublin, you wouldn't hear it in O.L.A. But you know, so we hear a lot. We hear a lot of bad things that are happening, and I think like the way of the cross, that there are Veronicas and Simons to, you know, help Jesus to carry his cross, help the Christians nowadays to carry their cross. But I must say that in Nigeria, we never asked anybody whether they were Christian or Muslim. Everybody who came to the door, we helped. And some of our best friends were Muslims. I mean, I suppose what we're talking about is a horrible something happening, you know, in that part of the world. And our hearts go out to them. And I think, like Veronica, I often think of it in my own work, that when you touch somebody else's pain, like Veronica did, she went and touched and took risk. I mean, that was a huge risk for a woman to take. And when we're told she touched his face with a towel, and the picture of his face is said to have come on her towel. And I think it's the same with us. When we touch somebody's pain, it imprints itself on us. And I think we carry the imprint of Christ's suffering every time we go near it. But it's very hard to go near pain.
I read somewhere where I think it's a bishop somewhere in Syria said recently, I think he said we are in the 5th year of the way of the cross because of what Christians are enduring there, and indeed Muslims as well. In view of what you just said regarding Veronica, and she did have to have the courage, but naturally there were many more in the crowd as well who held back. What do you think that we in the Western world, in Ireland, who now know what is happening? It was different in the past because we didn't know, as you said, but now because we know it, is there anything we should be doing or could do, in your view?
I think we all should be doing whatever is possible with whatever means we have, whether it is communication, money, whatever, the prayer. I don't know what we should be doing, but I think we should be doing as much as we can with what we have, with the resources we have, because this is shouting at us, isn't it? It is. It's something that's just coming into us, into our homes every day. It's shouting at us.
I suppose the thought that strikes me when you just said that is, if you have only a towel, use it, just like Veronica did. I'd like to come back now and take you back to when we were all a little younger, and take you back home to O.L.A, to your family home. And what aspects of your family life would you like to maybe just recall for us, and what aspects of it in particular influence you to give your adult life in the service of others, in the service of the new way?
I suppose, like all of it, my roots are like deeply into the earth of, O.L.A. That's where I grew from. My roots are there. And it's very difficult to know what it is that our roots are made of. But the roots and the parents and the whole atmosphere that was there was healthy. It was faith, but like I said before, not over the top faith.
Yes.
It was just ordinary faith and work. Not that they were of equal importance, but it was like a very Celtic thing. Like God was in everything. God was like the cattle. If a cow died, if there was somebody, everything was part of the whole. Everything was connected, and I think it was that lovely unity that everybody was equal, which helped me an awful lot. Was part of my in Africa. Never looked at colour or religion or whatever it was. People were all accepted, and I think that came from my own roots and from my father, who would be very welcoming to, the tinkers at the time. We used to call them,
Yes.
to stay in
The travellers, as we would call them now, yes, indeed, yeah.
Sleep on the settle, and like interested. My father was very interested in the stranger. I just
Yes.
love to hear what the stories, half of them not true maybe, but the stories they're told about other parts of the country or whatever. So I think that coloured my, and our grandmother, we saw our grandmothers dying, and it was all part of that wonderful, like, tapestry of our lives. And the tapestry of our lives had so many colours. It wasn't just the nice pinks and blues or golds. There were the darks of despair, the blacks of envy, the purples of loss, all these things. They were all part of our lives. And I think it's very hard to separate out what was it. Life was life as a whole.
Yes, to a cohesive tapestry,
Something,
as you said.
yes.
Was St. Abbey, St. Goblet,
Very much,
part of it?
very much.
Yes, I often think of that now that I'm a little bit away from Ballybunion, not very far, of course, but how from the 6th century, I suppose, continuously, almost every day ever since, there are people there in the shrine in Ballybunion praying. It's quite extraordinary,
Isn't it?
I
Isn't
think.
it? It is.
And of course, being from Ballybunion, we always felt that she was that little bit
Aye.
more favourable towards
To us, yes.
to us, yes.
We were
indeed.
special there.
That's right, yeah. Can I ask you if you see any threats to the Christian faith nationally and internationally? And I know you have your view on this. Maybe threats is not the right word, but would you interpret for us perhaps what is some of the things that happen in the world at this present time, and in Ireland and internationally?
My own kind of where I would be coming from is, yes, I'm a Christian, but I'm part of the human race. I think quite broad. I'm part of the human race with my Christian values, and like, God is in everything. God was in Jesus, but he's also the divine is within all of us, and within creation. And I think the broader we think of life, the better I think we realize that everything is sacred and holy, and everything is filled with the divine and filled with the Spirit. And there are threats. There are threats to so many things, and so many values are threatened, and so many Christian values are maybe not appreciated. But deep down, there's something in all of us that longs to make sense of everything. To make sense, what is the meaning of our lives? Why are we here? Like Gay Byrne, why are we here? And I think we need to answer that in maybe a new way at this present time. Maybe to think of it from the point of view of the whole creation story. The whole, our whole origin story which we're learning in a new way. I mean, it's a wonderful gift. We know something now that no generation has ever known.
Sure, absolutely. Just in our earlier chat, just before we began filming, you had mentioned to me that the human only became part of part of the universe very late in the life of the universe, and that we didn't just appear suddenly. So would you maybe just like to elaborate very briefly on that? Because
yes.
I know many young people would they're very educated now, and they have questions to ask about the story of creation and so on, and working the 6 days and God taking the rest on the seventh. But you have another perspective on that that certainly I think many young people would like to hear, and many older as well, of course, perhaps.
I think we all, every country, Africa, everywhere have a creation story. I've heard amazing ones in Africa of how they felt that the world started.
Okay.
But, you know, you can imagine our way back, our ancestors thousands of years ago, sitting outside on the campfire and they'd be seeing lightning and thunder and the sun going down, rising in the morning. So they said, what is happening? So they had to make a story. So they made a story with the knowledge that they had. Now we are so privileged to know the scientific story of how our universe began. Billions of years ago, 13.7 billion years ago. And over billions of years, everything that existed in that Big Bang, nothing was ever added after that. It's believed that the amount of God's creativity was in that, and it has evolved over billions of years, and eventually it became conscious, and the conscious universe is us. We are the universe conscious of itself. But if you put the universe story into into a year, we only came at the very end of December. The universe has existed for billions of years before we ever came. So we're very new. And the universe has had amazing wisdom and life and energy way before we came at all. So we're the universe in a new form, just as the dog is universe in that form.
Mm-hmm.
The flowers are the universe in that form. So the universe is where the universe is now conscious. We can look back. There was one time when the universe didn't see itself. Then the eye. So for the first time the universe could look at itself. Then it got ears, another part of the... But so it's an absolutely amazing story. And we're actually doing that cosmic walk in Cork. And we're hoping to do it maybe in other places if we get the confidence to, because we're only learning ourselves.
Sure, sure. So your suggestion is that if the world began on the 1st of January, the human didn't come into the story until 2 minutes to 12.
That's right.
On the 31st of December.
That's right.
Now, another time perhaps we'll talk about the cosmic walk, but I would like to just also, because it was quite a coincidental thing that I mentioned earlier about young people are fabulous, and I don't want to just be condescending to them or anything. I taught them, and I have children myself and grandchildren, so I know the goodness there is in the young people and the idealism, I think, but they are nobody's fools, and they want to know and to ask questions, and deep questions, and to be given answers. And one of the things I said to you earlier, that as far as I know, in the Bible, certainly the one time that Jesus gave a very definitive description of what God is, he said, God is good. And I suppose at times that if God is in us, as you said, then it's the good. And any time we deviate from that or go away from it, we don't feel quite right. so that 'tis the aspiration to return to all that is good and decent and holy. So I don't know if you'd like to comment on that bit of, this is only elementary theology now on my part.
Can you just repeat that again now?
Just in relation to that, Jesus said, we often, the young people would say now, there's no God. That's only God's wall. If you're only saying that because you want to believe it and it suits you. But I think that maybe they're right in that maybe some people see God as a politician who can, you can go to him and you ask him and he promised something and a vote and he does a bit of pull for you, and like that's the kind of a perception some have. That's very simplistic, and I certainly wouldn't want to offend anybody, but maybe some people think that others see God like that. No, I don't, but I just said that in our story earlier on, our discussion, I mentioned that Jesus said one time that he said God is good, God alone is good.
Yes.
And you said that's interesting.
That's today's gospel.
Because it's today's gospel.
That's right.
So would you maybe just comment on that and how that is related to us, to what motivated you in your life to go and work for good?
Yes. Well, God is good. And I think from the very beginning, like whatever we call God, it just happens that we mention that word G-O-D. But whatever we call God, everything was started by this amazing, awe-inspiring energy. Was in that first beginning of the universe, and God has never left that universe since. He's within us, and he is constantly evolving us into something more complex, greater, more, as Teilhard de Chardin would say, closer to himself. And that Teilhard de Chardin that's the way he saw the universe, becoming more and more conscious and eventually becoming closer and closer to the divine. But we have so many blockages to kind of allowing God to be God in us, and to everything in the universe. We always say it went on autopilot in the beginning. Everything, God, the energy of the Spirit was working. Then human beings came along with their conscious minds. Then they got selfish. Then they began to use the earth for their own advancement, which is okay. But then we began to damage the earth and take more out of the earth than we should have. And we're polluting the earth. And if we continue like this, we're going to destroy the womb out of which we came, because the earth is our mother, and we need to look after her,
and be gentle with it.
That's right, and we're demanding more than our earth can give us. And I'm straight from what you asked me there, but that when Jesus came, Jesus was a whole new step forward in consciousness, and he was in touch with the God who is love, and the God who was showing us which way to go. And we've lost our way at times. We've lost our way, but we're not telling ourselves or our children the right story. Young people are not interested in dogma or theory. They want something that relates to their lives. And I think maybe that we need to rethink how we're giving them that message. We're using language that's archaic and that doesn't speak the language of 21st century Ireland.
I was actually, now that you mentioned dogma, I was actually going to ask you this question, even though we hadn't discussed it earlier. And, we started off with the new way, the wonderful way in which the O.L.A. sisters and your life and your story in the missions lived out that way, the way of caring, sharing, the way of selflessness as distinct from selfishness. But I think I mentioned to you at the beginning that sometimes I think we are so much inside in the wood, so much inside the forest, that we don't see the forest, we just see the trees. And I'm just wondering, touching on your point that we are not relating properly to young people and maybe to everybody else as well. I wonder, have we become too dogmatic, too rules orientated, too much guided by regulation? X is Y, X is right, sorry, and Y is absolutely wrong. I think there is an issue there that if you have too much regulation, that becomes the guiding force, and that the original message of the new way is diminished, not lost, but diminished. Would you agree
I would
with
agree
that?
fully
Yeah.
with that. I would
Yeah.
agree fully with it, and I think this is the big. I mean, I'm too old to be even, but it's the job of the church and the people who have, who are trying to to revive what Jesus told us. We've forgotten what Jesus told us, we're using to cover our kind of ignorance almost. But we're using all these churchy words which mean nothing.
Yes, they weren't there in his time.
Not at all.
They're an invention of a later time. Okay, so it's been fascinating talking to you. I think we could do another program or two on some of the deeper aspects of things, but I'd maybe just like, by way of your final question, to looking back, is there anything you would do differently? Or would you like to comment on anything?
Is there anything I would do differently? And for some strange reason, the one thought that comes into my head when you say that is an incident, a very strange incident that happened in a little hospital in Bachita, little very remote hospital. And I was coming home to Ireland tomorrow, and I was so pleased. It was the middle of the day, about 2 o'clock in the day. We had just finished the clinic, and the sun was just straight on top of us, and I closed the clinic door, and I was thinking, well, that wonderful, I'll be off tomorrow. And then just racing in the gate was a little group of women, and with a little baby in there, pleased to help them. So the baby was maybe 3 or 4 days old. When we were in the womb, the little belly button, the two sides come together like that, and we're left with the little belly button.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes there's, I'd never seen one before, there's a condition where the two sides don't come together, and there's a big hole here,
Okay.
and the two sides don't come together. So it's called exomphalus. It's a big name. I'd read it in textbooks, but I had never seen one. So they had put a pat of cow dung on top of, because this was supposed to be the cure, and around it there was something that looked like the stole that the priest
Okay.
put away. So they were Muslims. They were living in a remote village, and apostolic workers from Ireland had sent out things for the priest, and this holy band, they called it. So when the baby was born, they put this around. I said, I can't do it. I've never done this. Nearest hospital is too far away, so we took the baby in, washed, dirt, on and on. Eventually, I repaired it. The little bit of chloroform we had to give the baby. I thought to myself, that baby's going to be dead tomorrow. Before I left the next morning, I ran over to the ward, and the baby was sucking the mother's breast, and the baby survived.
Fantastic.
And it's funny when someone asks me a question like that, and this has happened to me before, for some reason that comes into my head. And I think to myself, would I do anything different? And the only thing I can say is definitely not.
That's great. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much. I hope a value will come from what we've done here today, because there are stories that people need to hear. Your story is one of them. It's fascinating. Thank you very much.